Welcome back to my inner sanctum. I'm your hostess, Countess Elizabeth, mistress of the macabre. People have been studied in the field of psychology to reach scientific conclusions. However, sometimes those conclusions are reached using unethical methods. Today, my fiends, we will look into 2 experiments that if performed now would be considered unethical. On today's video, we will look into experiments that study the most vulnerable people, children. So let us put on our white lab coat and observe the experiment so we can explore our grotesque curiosity. The first experiment we will look at is the Little Albert experiment. The Little Albert experiment was a controlled experiment showing empirical evidence of classical conditioning in humans. The study also provides an example of stimulus generalization. It was carried out by John B. Watson and his graduate student Rosalie Rayner at Johns Hopkins University. The results were first published in the February 1920 issue of the Journal of Experimental Psychology. The aim of Watson and Rayner was to condition a phobia in an emotionally stable child. For this study, they chose a 9-month-old infant from a hospital referred to as Albert. Watson followed the procedures which Pavlov had used for his experiment with dogs. Before the experiment, Albert was given a battery of baseline emotional tests. The infant was exposed briefly and for the first time to a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, masks with and without hair, cotton, wool, burning newspapers, and other stimuli. Albert showed no fear of any of these items during the baseline tests. For the experiment, by which Albert was 11 months old, he was put on a mattress on a table in the middle of a room. A white laboratory rat was placed near Albert, and he was allowed to play with it. At this point, Watson and Rayner made a loud sound behind Albert's back by striking a suspended steel bar with a hammer each time the baby touched the rat. Albert responded to the noise by crying and showing fear. After several such pairings of the 2 stimuli, Albert was presented with only the rat. Upon seeing the rat, Albert got very distressed, crying and crawling away. Apparently, the infant associated the white rat with the noise. The rat, originally a neutral stimulus, had become a conditioned stimulus, and it was eliciting an emotional response, similar to distress, originally given to the noise. In further experiments, little Albert seemed to generalize his response to the white rat. He became distressed at the sight of several other furry objects, such as a rabbit, a furry dog, a sealskin coat, and even a Santa Claus mask with white cotton balls on the beard. However, this stimulus generalization did not extend to everything with hair. Watson's experiment had many failings by modern standards. For example, it only had a single subject and no control subjects. Furthermore, such an experiment could be hard to conduct in compliance with current laws and regulations, given the expected risks to the subject. Albert was about 1 year old at the end of the experiment, and he reportedly left the hospital shortly thereafter. Though Watson had discussed what might be done to remove Albert's conditioned fears, he had no time to attempt such desensitization with Albert, and it is thought likely that the infant's fears of furry things continued post-experimentally. No one knew the identity of little Albert, but there had been some speculation. According to some textbooks, Albert's mother worked in the same building as Watson, and didn't know the tests were being conducted. When she found out, she took Albert and moved away, letting no one know where they were going. A 2009 report, however, disputes this. The original report had stated that the baby's mother was a wet nurse at the hospital, who may have felt coerced and unable to turn down a request for her baby to be used in Watson's experiments. In 2009, psychologists Hall P. Beck and Sharman Livingston published an article in which they claimed to have discovered the true identity of Albert B. After reviewing Watson's correspondence and publications, as well as research in public documents, such as the 1920 United States Census and state birth and death records, Beck argued that Albert B. was a pseudonym for Douglas Marit, son of Arvilla Marit, then a woman who appears to have been a wet nurse at the Harriet Lane home. It was later found that Douglas Marit suffered from hydrocephalus, which he died from at the age of 6 years old. With this condition, which is when there is an accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain, Marit may have had severe trouble seeing at the time of the experiment, and thus voids the claim that the child in question was average and healthy. According to researchers who looked at this case years later, if Douglas Marit was indeed little Albert, his actions during the conditioning sessions align with the signs of neurological impairment. This includes little Albert's use of hand scooping, rather than grasping gestures typical of this age, as well as poor eye scanning abilities and his lack of facial expressions. Recent research has shown, however, that Douglas Marete may not have been Little Albert, and Little Albert may have been young William Barger. William Barger had been born within a day of Marete, was known by friends and family as Albert, even though his given name was William, and his mother had worked at the hospital where the experiment was conducted. In addition, his size and developmental condition much more closely matched the experiment's documentation of the subject baby's condition. Through the use of a professional genealogist, the researchers learned Barger had died in 2007 at the age of 87 and identified one close living relative, a niece. In an interview, Barger's niece stated that she and her uncle had been quite close throughout his life, acknowledged Barger's antipathy towards dogs as a well-known fact that family members, particularly his wife, would tease him about. She also informed researchers that her uncle's aversion to animals in general, not just dogs. Though it was not quite particularly strong aversion, family members would often have to keep their dogs in a separate room when he visited. Outside of this, Barger's niece stated that she didn't recall any other phobias he may have had. The researchers concluded that Barger would have been unaware of his role as an infant test subject. Another psychological experiment with children is known as the monster study experiment. The monster study was a stuttering experiment performed on 22 orphan children in Davenport, Iowa in 1939. It was conducted by Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa. Graduate student Mary Tudor conducted the experiment under Johnson's supervision. Half of the children received positive speech therapy, praising the fluency of their speech, and the other half, negative speech therapy, belittling the children for speech imperfections. Many of the normal-speaking orphan children who received negative therapy in the experiment suffered negative psychological effects, and some retained speech problems for the rest of their lives. The research began with a selection of 22 subjects from a veterans orphanage in Iowa. None were told of the intent of her research, and they believed that they were there to receive speech therapy. Tudor was trying to induce stuttering in healthy children and see whether telling stutterers that their speech was fine would produce a change. Included among the 22 subjects were 10 orphans whom teachers and matrons had marked as stutterers before the study began. Tudor and 5 other graduate students who agreed to serve as judges listened to each of the children speak, graded them on a scale of 1 poor to 5 fluent, and concurred with the school's assessment. 5 were assigned in the group 1A, the experimental set, and would be told that their speech was fine. The 5 in group 1B, the control group, would be told that their speech is as bad as people say. The remaining 12 children were chosen at random from the population of normally fluent orphans. 6 of these were assigned to 2A. These children, ranging in age from 5 to 15, were to be told that their speech was not normal at all, that they were beginning to stutter, and that they must correct this immediately. The final 6 children in group 2B, similar to those in 2A, were normal speakers who were treated as such and given compliments on their nice enunciation. On the first visit, Tudor tested each child's IQ and identified whether they were left-handed or right-handed. A popular theory at the time held that stuttering was caused by cerebral imbalance. If, for example, a person had been born left-handed but was using their right hand, their nerve impulses would misfire, affecting their speech. Johnson didn't believe this theory, but had suggested that Tudor test each child's handedness. She had them draw on chalkboards and squeeze the bulb of a dynamometer. Most were right-handed, but left-handed children were present in all groups. There was no correlation between handedness and speech in the subjects. During this period, they assigned numbers to the children, such as case number 15 experimental group 2A. The experimental period lasted from January until late May 1939, and the actual intervention consisted of Tudor driving to Davenport from Iowa City every few weeks, talking with each child for about 45 minutes. She followed an agreed-upon script. In her dissertation, she reported that she talked to the stuttering youngsters who were going to be told that they did not stutter. She said to them in part, "You'll outgrow the stuttering, and you'll be able to speak even better than you are speaking now. Pay no attention to what others say about your speaking ability, for they undoubtedly do not realize that it is only a phase." To the non-stuttering youngsters in 2A, who were to be branded as stutterers, she said, "The staff has come to the conclusion that you have a great deal of trouble with your speech. You have many of the symptoms of a child who is beginning to stutter. You must try to stop yourself immediately. Use your willpower. Do anything you can to keep from stuttering. Don't ever speak unless you can do it right. You see how this person stutters, don't you? Well, he undoubtedly started this very same way." The children of 2A responded immediately. After her second session with 5-year-old Norma Jean Pugh, Tudor wrote, "It was very difficult to get her to speak, although she spoke very freely in the month before. Another in the group, 9-year-old Betty Romp, particularly refuses to talk, A researcher wrote in his final evaluation, Hazel Potter, 15, the oldest of her group, became much more conscious of herself, and she talked less. Potter also began to interject and snap her fingers in frustration. She was asked why she said "a" so much, and she responded, "Because I'm afraid to say the next word." "Why'd you snap your fingers?" "Because I was afraid I was going to say A." All the children's schoolwork fell off. One of the boys began refusing to recite in class. The other, 11-year-old Clarence Pfeiffer, started anxiously correcting himself. "He stopped and told me he was going to have trouble on words before he even said them," Tudor reported. She asked him how he knew. He said that the sound wouldn't come out. "It feels like it's stuck in there." The sixth orphan, Mary Krolaski, a 12-year-old, grew withdrawn and fractious. During their sessions, Tudor asked whether her best friend knew about her stuttering. Krolaski muttered, "No." "Why not?" Krolaski shuffled her feet. "I hardly ever talked to her," she said. 2 years later, she ran away from the orphanage and eventually ended in a rougher industrial school for girls, simultaneously escaping her human experimentation. Mary Tudor herself wasn't untouched. 3 times after her experiment had officially ended, she returned to the orphanage to voluntarily provide follow-up care. The impact, however well-meaning, was questionable. She wrote to Johnson about the orphans in a slightly defensive letter dated April 22nd, 1940. "I believe that in time they will recover, but we certainly made a definite impression on them." Well, that was truly a grotesque tale. Both experiments on children were definitely unethical based on today's standards. I noticed that they were both done before the 1950s, so maybe attitudes towards children being used in experiments were different than today. Hopefully the people involved in at least the monster study are okay, since it seems that little Albert may be dead by now. May the souls of those experimented on rest in peace. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe, like, and share if you would also like to keep exploring our grotesque curiosity. We will meet again in the darkness of the night.